And it made a lot of sense to me, but I was telling her that for me, this simulation didn't make me feel good. All I felt was a bunch of angst, anxiety, and frustration because I'm already dealing with this. Simulating this didn't inform me or make me feel better. It just really had me standing there feeling even more confused, like I'm in a maze that's a microcosm of the maze I'm already in. But I do understand that it's necessary to increase awareness and information for people who haven't been in the system. And so for someone who hasn't necessarily been CLS impacted, who's not living this reality, then this is absolutely going to be an informative simulation to give you an idea of what we're really experiencing. But you know, it wasn't overwhelming, but it was definitely a challenge for me. Going through this simulation and thinking like, this is what I'm really dealing with. Like going to the county clerk's office, trying to go downtown and reach out to different people and ask for information. And everyone keeps telling me basically, well, I can give you this, but I can't give you that, or I can tell you this, but I can't tell you that. And I'm just trying to piecemeal, figure it out, and put it together. And the greater likelihood is that I, like a lot of people, probably just give up and just say, you know what, I'm not even gonna keep fooling with this. I'm gonna go to work, try to make me some money, and just try to have the best life I can have without my voting rights. But that's not fair, because at the end of the day, disqualifying me from having to vote, taking away my voice, I did my time, a bunch of it, every single day of it. And so to now have gotten out with the desire to be a positive, proactive, and productive citizen and be basically relegated to second or third class citizenship indefinitely, that's not right. It's not fair, that's why we're here. But this is my experience, this is what I'm feeling. I didn't mind expressing it, voicing it, and sharing it, so maybe you can gain something from that insight.
I think somebody brings up a really good point. Like, these are all, like, Moses is right here, Dawn is here. Folks have shared their real story and shared aspects of their life and are willing to share that story in order so that other people can learn. But that doesn't take away from the fact that even walking the steps in this room is its own sort of difficulty and challenge, and experiencing a small part of what folks have to go through all the time, every day. And so we're very grateful to those who are willing to share their story, folks like Cedric, who are willing to speak up about the experience. Yes.
I'm Howard Gentry. I'm the criminal court clerk. I didn't even plan to come today because I knew Cedric would be here, but then I couldn't stay away. And after I got through hearing this gentleman, and I did not plan to come because I didn't want to be here, but I knew Cedric was going to be here. And when I know these groups that are here, I know that I don't have to be here. But I was drawn to say something after listening to the gentleman just a few minutes ago, because he's talking about something that's going to happen every time you try to help somebody through this situation. It's going to be more challenging. It's going to be a roadblock. It's going to be a point where you're not going to be able to do any more than you're able to do in your space. And I'm getting ready to say something that I've already said to Kia, Three Hearts, and other organizations in here. When you get to that place, send them to us. Send them to Cedric. When you get to that point where you can't do anything else for them, send them to us. We will take them from that point to the end. We will do that. It's going to put more work on us. I don't care. It's going to put more work on Cedric. He doesn't care. But until we get this thing smoothed back out, they cannot stop us. We cannot allow government and entities within government to stop us. It's only a hurdle. It's not a wall. It's not the end of the world. But not only are the people going to be frustrated, you're going to get frustrated because you're not going to be able, in all instances, to be able to take them beyond where you all are. And it's no indictment on you. It's the way the law has been set up. Please, and if you don't send them to us, at least call us. At least call us and let us help walk you beyond the point that you are. And we'll be there for you each time. Get Cedric's number, get my number. We will make sure that when you get to that place where you feel like you can't do anything else for them, we'll get you beyond that spot. Until Keita succeeds, no, but she is working with us, with the judges in circuit court to get beyond this roadblock too, and we will get beyond it. In the meantime, don't let anybody come to you and you have to say to them, I've done all I can do, or you're going to have to do this. Don't make them have to do anything. Call us or send them to us. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gentry. I know we are cutting into lunchtime. I will say that we have four copies of the entire simulation printed out and ready for folks to use. If you decide that would be helpful. Maybe you don't need it, right? Maybe you looked at it. But if you think it would be helpful for your organization and your advocacy to run Choropoly, come talk to me. I know Don has some thoughts as well. But we do have those copies ready for you if you want to run some of your own. Don, is there anything else folks need to know before we go to lunch? Do you want to close us out? What do we need to know?
Okay. We're not at lunch yet, but now I'm gonna call up Blair Bowie from Campaign Legal Center, Joy Radis from UTK Law, and Keita Haynes from Free Hearts.
They're setting up, I'm gonna get this put up.
I'm a professor at the legal clinic. I'm here with Tyler Yardy, who's another professor at the legal clinic. We have for years been helping people get their voting rights back through the core, and we've absolutely hated it. And we thought we've got to destroy the core, we've got to fix this law, and then this change happened, and we realized the core isn't as bad. And so, just to get started, we just want to give you the 5-minute rundown. June hits, Blair's case comes down. The Supreme Court says for an out-of-state resident who had restored his full rights in Virginia, thanks to the governor giving him clemency, that he was going to be able to just vote in Tennessee because he got his voting rights back. That seems pretty simple. Case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in a 3-1 decision. Of course, we agree with the dissent, but that was not in a 3-1 decision says that not only does he get all his full rights back, but now he's got to fill out this piece of paper which says he has to be up to date on child support, which says he has to have paid his court costs, which says he has to have paid restitution. And so all those obstacles apply too. So what we then thought was this was a horrible decision, but we thought it was limited just to out-of-state individuals until the end of July. And I cannot tell you, like, I remember the flurry of emails that came down that Friday afternoon when Mark Boyne sent out that memo saying, you know what, everybody now in Tennessee who has a felony conviction to restore their right to vote has to go through a full circuit court petition and then turn to the court. Prior to that, my students have always thought of it as either or. So when we counseled our clients, we would say, do you want to go to court and we can get all of your civil rights back? And when you're losing your rights, the right to vote is the one we're talking about today. But what are other rights that you lose by virtue of felony conviction? Right to serve on a jury. Who's yelling it out? Gun rights. What else, Moses? Right to run for office. So all of these rights that make us full and whole, it really touched me when somebody said they were a partial citizen, because that's what happens by virtue of the felony conviction. And so what ended up happening is we would have a conversation saying, do you want to go through this court process, which Peter described as very traumatizing, you have to go up in front of a judge, you have to give notice to the DA, or do you want to fill out this piece of paper that no one has discretion over? As long as you meet the requirements, and we're going to help you do that as a legal clinic, we'll get you your voting rights back. So what do you think most of our clients chose? They chose to do the path where they had no discretion, where they filled out the paperwork, and yes, it was hard, but it wasn't 6 months hard. It wasn't go in front of a judge and lay out all of your history of who you are or why you deserve the right to vote, which is what we now have to do. So in July, Mark Boyce, the coordinator of election, said, hold up, now you have to file with the circuit court showing that you deserve all of your rights back, and then once you get that order, you have to bring that order with the core fully filled out and now restore your right to vote. In looking at the statutes, all the lawyers in here agree that we don't think he's right. But at least right now, that memo dictates. And just to give you an example, if anybody wanted to see, one of our most recent, I talked to Mr. Ellis, and he said I could talk about his case. I have one of our most recent full civil restoration that we've done with the attachments, with all the certificates to prove he's deserving of all his civil rights back. We're talking about a 76-page document. That's a really big difference when you're talking about the core. So as we talk today about legislative reform, I just wanted to give us a little context about where we came from and where we'd like to go.
Thank you. So, as you hear, we're in a bad situation with this new guidance. And one of the sort of from the bottom, a potential upswing here is that there's going to be a lot of energy for legislative reform this year. And so, Dawn and Keita and all the folks at Free Heart thought it would be important to spend some time here getting on the same page about what we want to see in legislation this year that would not just restore the status quo, but potentially move us beyond where we started. So the purpose of the presentation that we're going to do is going to be to talk through all of the potential policy planks, the pieces of the process that could be changed, and then have a discussion about what folks in the room think are the most important priorities for moving together. So we're going to go through all those policy planks. We're going to have the opportunity to hear about the folks who were here for the directly impacted day yesterday had this conversation and then talked about some of their priorities. So we're going to get a report back on that, sort of bottom line, what we will support, what we won't support. And then everyone's going to get a chance to sort of vote on, you'll get a piece of paper, you'll vote, you'll think about what your priorities are, what your bottom lines are, and then we'll just have a discussion about it. Sound good? Okay, so before we get into it, for all the folks in the room, who here has gone through the voting rights restoration process themselves? Okay. Who has tried? Who's helped somebody else do it? Okay. Who's learned about the process from hearing about it through other people? Okay. So there's a lot of different experience in the room. I think it's just important to sort of look around and see that people are approaching this from different personal experience. And so we're all just going to have respect for each other and the different experience people bring to this discussion. Okay? All right, so again, our goal is to build a unified policy platform that we can move together on because we're more powerful together than apart. And I've sort of grouped the possible areas for reform into some buckets that we're going to talk about. The first bucket is reforming the criteria for restoration. So what I mean by this is right now, before you can be eligible to restore your voting rights in Tennessee, you have to have paid off court costs or get a declaration saying you can't pay them off. You have to have paid off restitution, be current on child support. You also have to finish probation and parole, right? People who are serving community supervision cannot get their voting rights restored. And you can't have been convicted of a set of permanently disqualifying convictions for which you can never restore your right to vote. Those are the criteria. If you don't meet any of those criteria, you can't get your voting rights restored in the new system or the old system. So one of the ways that we can work on fixing the system is eliminating or alleviating some of those criteria, right? So that's the first bucket. The second is really about the procedures, right? So Coropoly, you've seen what the process was like before this new guidance. And now you've heard from Joy about what it's like with the new guidance. So even if you meet all of these really high bars for being eligible to get your voting rights restored, you still can't do it unless you can get through the process. And so that's another way we can get at this, is reforming the process, making it easier. And then the last bucket is limiting who loses the right to vote in the first place. Tennessee is among a small group of states where the Constitution says that people only lose the right to vote for infamous crimes. And at different times, that has meant different things. So before 1973, only a certain set of crimes could take away the right to vote. Between 1973 and 1981, no one lost the right to vote. And then starting in 1981, infamous crimes has meant all felony convictions. But it doesn't have to be that way. So that's actually another way to get at this, is to limit what infamous crime means and make it so that people don't lose their voting rights in the first place. So not just fixing the restoration process or criteria, but doing away with disenfranchisement. So we're going to talk about each of those in turn. And I want to say, I know that there's a lot of experience in the room, so if you think I'm missing something, raise your hand, okay? Anyone think I'm missing a bucket? That's a good start. Okay. So just to recap, under the current criteria, folks cannot owe restitution, cannot owe court costs, except if they've been declared indigent, cannot owe child support, and that includes counting arrears, so like back pay that people accrue. Folks have to have completed probation or parole, and cannot have been convicted of certain crimes, or permanently disqualifying crimes. So the first subgroup here is removing some of the financial barriers to voting rights restoration, right? Under the current system, a lot of people have to pay back mountains of debt in order to even be eligible to restore their voting rights, right? Does that resonate with anyone? Okay. Does that sound like a poll tax to anyone? Yeah. Right. Okay. So just for perspective, Tennessee is one of only 8 states that explicitly hinges rights restoration on payment of these debts, what we call legal financial obligations. So Tennessee is way behind the curve on this. And you can think about this in a few different ways. There's different buckets of debt, right? There's court costs, there's restitution, there's child support. They're all treated a little bit differently under the current system. But I think the bottom line that we can all agree on is that people should not be shut out of democracy simply because they can't afford to buy the right to vote back. So this is one of the areas that we can work on reforming. The best solution is to get rid of all of these, right? Get rid of the requirement altogether, basically make it so that your right to vote is not contingent on the size of your wallet. But short of that, there are some other reforms that can happen. So a few of the intermediate measures here, short of just eliminating the requirement, you could get rid of some of the requirements. You could get rid of the requirement that people have to pay court costs. You could get rid of the requirement that people have to pay restitution. You can also have a system where if somebody is paying on their debt for a certain amount of time, they can get their voting rights restored. Right? So they've sort of shown that they are putting in an effort, but don't have to pay off the whole debt before they can get their voting rights restored. Another way to go about this is to make sure that people who can't afford to pay don't have to pay in order to get their voting rights restored. There's already a built-in exception for people who can get a court order saying that they're indigent, in other words, cannot pay, but that only applies to court costs, and it's actually really hard for people to get that order in many counties. So expanding the exception for people who can't pay is another way to go about this. You can also eliminate the child support requirement. Or, sort of a half measure there, allow people who owe years and years of back pay but are currently paying to get their voting rights restored. One thing to note is that because child support right now comes in at the very end of the process, it's the last thing that gets checked. Was anyone Milton in the simulation? Yeah, right, you were almost done, and then they said, oh no, you owe child support, right? So it comes in at the very end, so most people don't even get that far. So without other reforms, eliminating the child support requirement doesn't necessarily help that many people. And then another big caveat here is if you think about some of the payment plans, we wouldn't want a system where you say, okay, if you've been paying on your debt for a year, then you can get your voting rights restored, but if you fall behind, we're going to take them back, right? So that's kind of a hard line that I know a lot of people want to draw on that. Any other thoughts or questions about this? Yeah.
What are we doing legislatively to clear the entire whole process?
Legislatively or through the courts?
Well,
I know what you're doing, yeah.
Because every time I go to DC or Philly, I get a good look at our founding principles in which we supposed to live. And they've gotten so far away from the Constitution. I feel like Donald Trump, okay? And that sounds crazy, but if we're gonna throw the Constitution out, then we don't have a democracy at all, because the founding principles are on the Constitution. So if we say child support, and I think they already did in the district court, determined when it came to traffic tickets that those fees and fines was unconstitutional. What difference here does it make it? What can we do to include that in the change?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think the overall answer is like legislation alone is not enough. We need a unified strategy of organizing legislation, litigation, to be able to break down this law in the end. But I think what you like is the last bucket where you get rid of certain convictions taken away from the vote in the first place. So a second set of the criteria you can reform here is letting people who are on probation or parole restore their right to vote. So right now, folks have fully finished probation or parole. We know that sometimes people can have really long sentences, and folks are out living in their communities, working in their communities, paying taxes, but don't have the right to vote. In Tennessee, over 69,000 people are on probation and parole. So even if they have paid off all of their legal debts, they still can't get their voting rights restored yet. So this is another piece that can be fixed here. And the answer is to just allow people serving community supervision to get their voting rights restored. Some half measures, and some states have a split system where people who are on probation can get their voting rights restored, but not people on parole, or vice versa. Another sort of half measure that some states do is let people restore their voting rights if they've been out of prison for a certain amount of years. So Louisiana, for example, folks can either be totally done with their probation and parole, or if they've been out for 5 years but are still serving community supervision, that's good enough. They say, okay, you get your voting rights back. Another similar sort of caveat to the one before is we wouldn't want a situation where if somebody's out for 5 years, they get their voting rights restored, and then they have a technical violation, that their voting rights can be taken back, right? We want voting rights to be permanent once people get them back. And then the last one on the criteria here is removing some of these permanent disqualifying convictions. So you all know that certain convictions mean you can never get your voting rights restored in Tennessee. Yeah. Who knows that? Who already knew that? Okay. Does anyone know what some of those convictions are? Tampering with evidence, right? Fraud, I heard. Voter fraud. Murder.
Right.
Rape. Treason, yeah. So there's a long list, but they really vary in the level of seriousness, right? Like, some of these are administrative crimes, and in particular, since 2006, this list includes low-level administrative crimes. So people can lose their voting rights permanently for, an example I always hear is like flushing a bag of weed down the toilet if the cops are knocking on your door that you can't bring with evidence. So people can lose their voting rights permanently for these like administrative crimes. And the solution is no one should be permanently excluded from democracy, so you eliminate that list and say if somebody served their sentences, they met all the other criteria, why are you still saying that they can't get their voting rights restored? Some intermediate measures here, you can just knock some of the crimes off the list. In particular, the ones that were added in 2006, those administrative ones. Or you could just let those folks still go to court and ask the court to restore their voting rights. So going through a discretionary process, at least let people try to convince a decision maker that they should have their right to vote back. So those are the eligibility criteria. Before we move on, are there ones that I missed? Are there other ones that are in people's minds? Okay. All right, so the next bucket is fixing the process. So now what we're talking about is you met all of those criteria that we just talked about, but that doesn't mean that you automatically have your right to vote back. It would in most states. Tennessee is one of only 3 states where people have to go out and get this additional piece of paper that says, yes, I met the criteria, and now I'm allowed to register to vote. Most states coordinate records between their agencies so that once somebody has met the criteria, they can just go register to vote. Right? Because the state already has those records in those cases. So this is just sort of an unnecessary administrative barrier, as you've seen through playing Queeropoly, right? Not necessary, basically designed to fail. So what we need is to fix the process. And now that we have this new guidance that says that people also have to get their rights to citizenship restored, even if you meet the criteria, and go through the process, you're not guaranteed that you'll get your voting rights restored. It's still up to a judge or the governor. So now we have a discretionary process. But I think it's important to emphasize that even before the new guidance, the process was already basically impossible. Fewer than 1% of all people who completed their sentence got their certificates of restoration. So this system was already very, very broken, as you experienced in Coropoli. That was the old system that most of you were playing under. So 2 things we can fix here. 1, correcting the Elections Division's bad faith guidance. Like Joy said, most lawyers look at this guidance and can tell that this is not at all what the Supreme Court said, and it's not at all what the law said. This is just a way to make it harder for people to vote. But the legislature can correct that pretty easily. So one thing the legislature can do is just make clear that these are alternative processes. You can go to court and try to get your voting rights restored, or you can get a certificate of restoration. You don't have to do both. One caveat I put here, again, is that returning just to the pre-guidance status quo doesn't move the ball forward, right? That just brings us back to the old system. So something to think about when you're voting. And then there's fixing the old process, which will still exist. Removing the core requirement for rights restoration. So like I said, most states just say, here are the criteria that you have to meet to get your voting rights restored. Once you meet them, you can register to vote. Tennessee makes you go through this unnecessary additional process, which really serves no purpose except to make it harder to vote. They're redundant, they waste taxpayer money, and the system has been inaccessible, opaque, and inaccurate for as long as we've seen. Pimos is a prime example of this. Her probation officer made a mistake and she almost went to prison for 6 years and 1 day. Right? These are error-ridden. The officers who are supposed to fill them out are not trained. And so you see mistakes on both sides. People being told that they're eligible when they're not, and people being told that they're ineligible when they are. The solution would be to eliminate cores and make restoration automatic once the eligibility criteria are met. The state can verify that people meet the criteria. An intermediate measure would be to create safeguards like an application. So instead of running around to different agencies, you just fill out a piece of paper that says, my name is Misty, I'm trying to get my voting rights restored. Send it to a central office, and they figure out if you're eligible. Very simple. Even Alabama does that. That always gets a rise out of folks in Tennessee. That's Alabama's process. Tennessee can do as good as Alabama, right? Okay. And another piece there is to have an appeal process. So if you're wrongly told, like Milton was, that you don't meet one of the eligibility criteria, you can just appeal that decision and get an answer. All right, and now just the last bucket here, and then we're going to move into some discussion. You can redefine infamous crimes. And this is, I think, the piece that moves the most towards abolition of felony disenfranchisement altogether. So, under the Tennessee Constitution, the legislature is only allowed to take away voting rights if they've said that a crime is infamous. Okay, so the legislature doesn't have unlimited power, and certainly elections officials don't have unlimited power. They have to say, these are the convictions that can possibly take away your voting rights. These are infamous crimes. As I mentioned earlier, since 1981, that's meant all felonies. But before that, there were periods where it didn't mean that at all. In fact, there was a period where there was no disenfranchisement. It's possible to get back to that. And it's also possible to limit illicit crimes. So, sorry, I have to bring up Alabama again. Alabama has a similar provision in its constitution that says that only crimes of moral turpitude can take away the right to vote. For over a century, Alabama had no definition, and so they just assumed it meant all felonies. And then in 2017, the legislature passed a law and said, no, actually, it's only these 40 felonies. And that cut the number of people who were disenfranchised in half. So almost 200,000 people regained the right to vote instantly because legally they had never lost it. So creating a list to narrowly define infamous crimes is another way to go about this. Another example, up in Washington, there's a group there that's looking to move towards abolishing felony disenfranchisement altogether. And one of the ways they're thinking of doing this is really narrowly defining infamous crimes. They also have a provision in their constitution that says only infamous crimes take away the right to vote. So what they want to do is say an infamous crime is any crime that's punishable by death. But they abolished the death penalty last year. So there are no crimes that are punishable by death. So these are ways that you can change the definition of infamy to limit the disenfranchisement in the first place, and then you can forget about all of the rights restoration stuff we just talked about. All right, I'm gonna hand it over to you, Tina.
Yeah, do folks have questions before we get the report back?
Blair, if we're thinking about automatic, that second bucket? Okay, I was just wasn't sure based on, so if that was part of the criteria that they were looking to change.
So that's the process. Right?
So Joy asked about automatic restoration. So that would be removing the core requirements. So getting rid of the requirement that you have to get this piece of paper that proves that you're eligible, and just allowing people to register to vote once they become eligible.
And that's the majority of states.
The majority of states, well, the majority of states, yeah, do that, yeah. Tennessee is one of only 3 states that requires a piece of paper that proves what the government already knows.
Okay, so I'm going to do a quick debrief on what we talked about yesterday with the directly impacted folks talking about this very same thing. And what we learned at the end of that is that the directly impacted community is not a monologue, right? Because there were many different thoughts, opinions about, you know, what we should do, right? Ultimately, of course, everybody agrees that, you know, we should support, you know, legislation that is going to make it the easiest for folks to get their voting rights back. But how we got to that was not really the same way. So we had a discussion yesterday that really centered around the restitution part, right? And we know here in Tennessee that's one of the biggest issues. That was the biggest issue that we ran into with the legislation just this past session was the restitution part, right? And so we had the conversation, and you know, as I shared with them yesterday, when we are talking about restitution, because it centers around that restitution that is for the victims, right? I say that I always struggle with that, so anytime we're having those conversations, I let Dawn lead those conversations. She tends to be a little bit more sympathetic about it than I am, and so, like I said, I'm able to perfect with everything that I have, I am not. So that was also part of the conversation. A lot of people did feel in the room that restitution was for victims, and quite a few of them thought that victims should get their restitution, right? But then they also said that they did not think that it should prevent people from voting. And then there were issues about whether we could do something other than restitution. You know, like the type of restorative justice or something there. And then there was another poll we talked about, and Blair talked about it here, allowing voters to vote while they were still on probation and parole. We had some folks that believe that you should be able to vote while you're on probation and parole. And we had some folks that say, like, they didn't feel that somebody should immediately be able to vote while they're on probation and parole. Thought maybe that there should be a waiting period for a person. And, you know, she thought that because she said that what she didn't want to see is for them to, you know, kind of start collecting data and saying that, you know, once folks get their voting rights back, you know, then they're back out here, you know, say committing crimes and doing all of this other kind of stuff, right? So, you know, they have their reasonings as to, you know, why they, you know, particularly felt that way. But we, you know, it was a very interesting conversation, you know, just to hear where different directly impacted folks stood on some of the issues that really is keeping folks in our community from being able to get their voting rights back. And so, you know, we're going to have pretty much the same conversation. I see the sheets in front of you all. And like I said, we all agreed, we were in agreement groups, all the groups strongly agreed on all of the principles, so like I said, how we got there, was interesting, and I'm sure that in this conversation with other folks in the room, it will be another interesting conversation as to what we agree on, what we do not agree on, and ultimately how we get there. So I'm excited to hear the discussions, excited to hear the report back from the entire group of folks today. So I'll turn it back over to Blair so that she can actually go over that, so that we can get started in our discussion, because I know y'all are excited to hear us talk.
Okay, so you all have in front of you a voting form. What you're thinking about here is scale 1 through 5. And you're thinking about these mostly as a standalone bill. So like, we'll start with 5. If there were a bill that just did the one thing in that row, would you support it? Do you think it should be a priority? 4 would be, I'd probably support that as a standalone, meaning it doesn't come with any other reforms. 3 would support this if it were part of a larger policy proposal. And then 2, probably not support as a standalone bill. 1 would definitely not support as a standalone bill. So you're going to just work on these, just think about each of these. I'm here to answer questions about them. Why don't we break into groups of 5, and you're going to discuss each of these, and you don't have to come to a consensus with the group, but if you do, great, you're allowed to have your own opinions. One thing I'll note is that there is not a row on here for limiting the definition of infamous crimes, so again, that's taking away certain felonies from removing the right to vote in the first place, so that's a write-in candidate. Yep.
Can you tell everybody to add that, under, is there anything else you want to say so that they can write that one as well?
Yeah, did you all hear that? So add under there, limit the list of infamous crimes.
I'm sorry, I meant to say where it says, is there anything else you want to rank? Put it in there.
Put it in there, yeah. Okay, and then we'll take, so how much time is lunch?
What's that for? I can tell you that this is it.
Alright, let's take 10 minutes and talk about those. We'll walk around if you have any questions, but just getting groups of 5. Alright? And if you're here with somebody from your organization, try to break apart and go to different groups.